Hi, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe, and I am here doing yet another installment in the Q&A that I do with freelancer questions for the Hit Subscribe community. Uh, Mostly every week, I come on here and try to do one of the things that I like to think I do best, which is rambling on live streams in case it helps people. That might not have been the absolute best advertisement for the channel, but nevertheless, I will soldier on and answer today's question, which I don't mean to laugh at. Like, I'm laughing at it in the sense of like, I kind of relate. But it is, I know I should create content on LinkedIn, but I hate it. How should I motivate myself? So I can kind of relate to that. LinkedIn is a bit of a silly place. I'm recording this of June of 2024. And this is at a time where I think like peak LinkedIn is that thing that went really viral as a meme, but probably not the way the creator intended, where a guy was like, I proposed to my girlfriend over the weekend, and here's what it taught me about B2B sales. And apparently that wasn't satire. That was an actual thing that somebody posted on LinkedIn. And I kind of feel like that embodies the current LinkedIn zeitgeist of heavily performative content. So it can be a little bit of a silly place to be and a silly place to want to be. So I get it. That said, if we're talking here about B2B, especially high ticket stuff, for better or for worse, LinkedIn has become a place that a lot of people do hang out in a professional context. It's probably one of the only reliable social channels where you can potentially get in front of strangers, and a lot of strangers. Others that you might get into, like, and I'll get into this maybe a little bit later here, but you could join Slacks or other professional communities. But the reach there is going to be lower, the barriers to entry a little higher. LinkedIn is definitely a B2B place, especially for high ticket stuff, to build pipelines. So there's no doubting its efficacy as a lead generation channel, especially for a service type business. So I'd say it's worth, getting over this hatred of it if you're able to. Now, you might think, especially if you're, I don't know, depending on how you might interpret my own like work history over the years, you might think, if you know me, that I would say, well, just suck it up, buttercup, and grind through that. But actually, no, I'm not going to say that. Grinding is kind of a sucker move. Like, anyway, I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but like grinding through something, I think of as a good way to overcome a temporary situation. So if your boss asks you to work the weekend, like sometimes you suck it up and do that. If you have like a deadline, or if 3 client things are hitting all at once and you want to deliver on your commitments, sometimes you grind something out, but it's generally going to be a short-term thing, because grinding anything long-term isn't sustainable. It's not only a recipe for burnout, it is quite simply bad business. If your business or any kind of business that you're creating relies on someone, especially you, playing hero ball to make it work, you, my friend, have built a bad business, and that is not something you could sell or sustain or staff or anything else. So I am not an advocate of grinding as an ongoing tactic. And this is important here, because what you're talking about is lead generation. This is how your business is going to acquire customers. And that is something that you should systemize, and that is something that you should be able to measure and quantify and determine return on investment on, which means you're going to need good data. And that means you're going to need enough data. You're going to need to do it over a representative sample size to make sure that you are doing enough in the channel to make sure that you can evaluate it. Ideally, you're bringing in some business, but you need to be methodical about this. And being methodical means you're going to need to execute it for weeks, months, maybe even years. And you're not going to do any of that if it's a grind that you hate. So whatever you do, I don't think it's simply a matter of saying, well, I hate this, but I'm just going to commit to doing it anyway indefinitely because I feel like I should. That's not a good approach. So the first thing I might offer is to try to deconstruct what you hate about it, or why you hate the platform. And maybe you can mitigate individual aspects of why you hate it. So I made some notes here ahead, but like, first of all, do you hate reading the content on LinkedIn? Like, do you go on there and it's a lot of fluff and performative stuff and you really don't like it? Because you could curate your feed to make it more valuable. I Haven't tried a lot of that myself. I don't know exactly how it goes to like mute people and try to curate your feed into something you like. I've done that heavily on Facebook, which is just, if you were to see my Facebook, it's like a demented collection of memes and insane things. But with enough effort, you can, make a platform less people arguing about politics and more weird memes. Like you can probably do that. But if you, aren't really up for that kind of effort, you could always just turn it into a fire and forget kind of situation. So you don't necessarily really even need to directly log in and consume it. You could queue up a bunch of draft content and then use, I don't know what is popping these days in that channel, if it's like, or what people use to like distribute social media stuff. I used to use, what was it? There was Meet Edgar, and there was one called, I can't remember anymore. Wow, that's weird. I used to use it a lot for a lot of years to distribute blog content promotion. But it's one of those tools where, you log in and it's hooked up to your socials and you can push content onto the native platforms. So you could do something like that, or even just log into LinkedIn with a bunch of drafts and schedule them. I bet you can schedule it, but you can do something to mitigate that part of it if it's that you don't like consuming the content. If it's something maybe like you feel inauthentic participating in the channel, or it seems like, it's just this flood of sort of performative low value content, which it often is, that doesn't mean you have to do that. You can zig where other people are zagging. You could create content that you find valuable or that you like to have your name on or what have you. You can do that even if it's not a supposed best practice, because if you come up with a content paradigm that you like, you will stick to it. And I promise you that, 6 months of creating content on your terms on the platform is going to be better than 6 days of miserably creating whatever you think passes for algorithm pleasing content and then giving up. That latter thing is not something that you should do. There's not going to be any value in it. So I don't know that I could enumerate all of this without getting into and going back in time. This isn't all that old a question, but I'm not sure what the hatred here is about exactly. So absent that knowledge, it's hard for me to give specifics, but there is an element of compartmentalization to it. If, you hate the blank page syndrome or you hate the medium or whatever, there's probably something specific that you hate about it. And this applies to like general wisdom for executing processes in your business or practice, by the way, which is if you take inventory of when you have resistance to doing something, if there's a kind of client call or a certain task or whatever that you procrastinate, it can be pretty helpful to start to unpack what specifically you hate, because it's probably more specific than you think. Like if it's a client call, maybe it's the small talk in the first 2 minutes, or, maybe it's that, of all things, you just feel awkward wrapping up the call. You don't know how to do that. If you zero in on the specific thing you don't like about the channel, you might find that there's a much easier solution to your problem that almost has nothing to do with the channel. So that's the first thing I would investigate, is dig into what it is you don't like and see if you can mitigate that micro concern, and maybe the rest of it isn't so bad. So if you really just can't overcome your hatred of it, again, I wouldn't force it. I would next see if there's a comparable channel where you can engage in sort of the same pipeline generating and prospecting activities that you might do on LinkedIn. So, and by the way, if you're a freelancer, especially if you're a generalist, if you're kind of an undifferentiated commodity laborer or something, I would be posting content onto a venue like LinkedIn to get attention, ideally a following, and to get people into your network and to know you and to be exposed to what you do, rather than something more mass market like advertising on LinkedIn or what have you. So generally, if you're running a service business with 5+ figures of annual contract value, or 6 figures of lifetime value, the way probably will be the case for a lot of freelance app dev type work, mass market type tactics don't work. You're really looking to get enough attention about a topic to get 20 leads per year or something, based on how successful you are at moving people down your funnel. So in that situation, you could look at other venues than LinkedIn to potentially do that. So if Twitter, I don't know to what extent that's still a thing, or if people still hang out there. I've been sort of off of that platform for a number of years now. But I do remember that there were, hashtags that you could be involved in, or communities. I forget how people, keep out the riffraff on that platform now, or DM communities. But if people are on Twitter and they're forming communities that are outwardly legible that you can join, you could use that social media as a way to sort of get to know and be exposed lightly to potential prospects. I would say in this day and age, something that I see a lot of is community Slacks that might range from a few hundred to upwards of 10,000 members. If they are professional communities or associations, or whatever you want to call it, if they share a common interest, you can go in there and be helpful and create content after a fashion in those communities, maybe occasionally share or promote your content, but really you're just kind of in there gaining visibility. And that's going to be sort of similar in concept to LinkedIn, and it might feel more genuine and authentic. So that's another thing you could explore. You could also think about creating content on like a more owned and stable channel, I'll say. Your own website is going to be the absolute most stable channel there is. So if you can create content on your website and then distribute it to other places and try to build a following on your website, I would always recommend that over a rented channel like LinkedIn. So the thing about LinkedIn or a channel or a community or whatever that I've been talking about that's great is you can instantly get in front of a lot of people organically on the platform, often without a ton of effort. So if you get on LinkedIn and you write a real banger of a post, and maybe the algorithm's trying to reward your early efforts of boosting you, you can find yourself, it's almost like going viral on Hacker News or something. You can get in front of a lot of people, and that's good, but realize that you're depending on their algorithm for that. So what will probably happen, what I imagine they do, just like other platforms of this nature will do, is the more you make them a part of your standard content creation paradigm, they'll probably start to de-emphasize your content after a while because you're hooked. You're already creating content on the platform. And then if you maybe go away, you get tired of it, come back a month later, create content, they'll boost you again because they want to keep you on the platform creating content. Those are the kind of games that you are playing on another platform. And by the way, they can do something similar to what Facebook did a bunch of years ago, which is just suddenly decide to show your content to only a fraction of the people they were showing it to yesterday, unless you pay them. So there's a lot of rules that you're playing by. They're heavily subject to change on these platforms. That goes away to some extent if you're publishing on your website. That's the venue you have the most control over, although you're still depending on your distribution efforts. And, if you're using search, you're depending on the SEO rules. So there's give and take in all of these, but there is the idea of creating content on the more stable, algorithmically transparent platforms gives you more options for distribution and more dependable stuff. But it comes without the sort of like instant audience and attention that you can get on these other platforms as well. So anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but if you feel good creating content on your own site, you could really just focus on that and then try to figure out how to use other channels to distribute that content and build an audience there. Same kind of thing with YouTube. You don't own that quite as much, but to more of a degree than maybe like LinkedIn, especially if you're not depending on YouTube's algorithm to bring you traffic and you're just building a following instead. But so in the end, what I'm saying here is if there's something about LinkedIn that's just a deal breaker for you, there are other places that you can approximate the following, the building of traffic and connections and the distribution that you would do on LinkedIn. So I would say figure out where you can sustainably create content and feel good about creating content. And that's probably going to be a lot more important than picking like the right thing to create content on. Because again, with the brittleness of a platform like LinkedIn, yeah, it's all the, it's a saturated medium that everybody's in right now, but who knows, maybe some other billionaire will buy them and make a lot of people leave the platform and it'll be something else in 2 years. So you're much better served to do something that's going to get you out there than to really fixate on the specific platform and try to force it. I guess the last thing you could think about is, depending on how successful your practice is and how much you would want to gamble with something like this, you could think about delegating the content creation. Now, there are a few ways that this could go. So The simplest one that I could think of that I wouldn't do is you could kind of pay someone to ghostwrite as you and operate your LinkedIn account. So they're synthesizing you, getting to know you, kind of creating content that they think sounds like you. Or like, I guess you could do this with ChatGPT or something too, but get someone to create content and then publish it as your content. I don't recommend this because you're probably not going to fool people for very long. Like sooner or later they'll see through this and then wonder, it'll seem very inauthentic, especially if you're doing high ticket trust based services. That's just a really weird way to introduce yourself to people, is with like a gimmick. So I wouldn't do that. I don't think it'll go well. You probably won't like it anyway. You won't want your name on it. So that's an option, but I wouldn't do that. What I would think about doing instead is hiring someone or delegating to someone in a capacity where, if you have a substantial amount of content you've created in some kind of venue in the past, then what they can do is go back through that content and synthesize it. They can summarize it. They can put it into bullet points and so on and so forth. So they can take things that you've created and publish them. And they can do that under a brand name. So like for me, for instance, many years ago when I was operating the consulting brand DeadTech, if I were going to do something like this, I might have hired someone to publish content on LinkedIn as DeadTech, and then I could go and share that content as me, Eric, but I'm not responsible for creating it. So I'm not trying to pretend that I created the content. Instead, I have, like a social media flavored VA or whoever, you wind up hiring, and I could weigh into that if you're interested. But the person that you hire to do this could have an association and a byline within your brand. So, this person that I hire would maybe list themselves as a fractional social media person for DeadTech. And I'm what did I call myself? Founder, I get principal of DeadTech. I could then, we could both interact with the brand that way. So the brand is publishing content. The social media person might be sharing it. I also might be sharing it. And that's reasonable. I mean, you might see things like that happening in a business community quite regularly. It's fairly common for businesses to hire someone to run their social media. And that's not all done via ghostwriting and pretending to be a founder or something. So that's a good example of how you can generate content on the platform. Now, is that going to be as effective as you creating compelling content in the first person? No, not for the algorithm, not for trust. But again, it is a way to kind of split the difference. It's better than nothing. It lets you build up some momentum. And you might find that as you're sharing what that person has done and synthesized from your past content, that you start getting inspired, or you have content to add when you want to share it, you say things about it, and so on and so forth. So that can be a really good option and a good way to get that content going. Now, if you don't really have a long history of creating content to draw from the way I do and probably take for granted, you could look for a person who does socials of this nature, but also, has in their repertoire of tools and skills the ability to kind of interview you, pick your brain for ideas, and then synthesize those ideas or those interviews into content. But the idea is they're going to be extracting content from you in some way or another, whether it's repurposing content you've already created or interviewing you. Now, if none of this sounds good, if you don't like LinkedIn, you don't have a past history of content, you don't really want to be interviewed or participating in creating content, then the final thing I might close out here by saying is, content marketing is probably not for you. And it could be, I hate to be harsh here, but the business ownership isn't for you, because in order to run a business, you're either going to need to market and sell that business, or you're going to need to be comfortable hiring someone or presiding over the marketing and sale of that business. And if you're a freelancer, the business by default is your mind and your ideas and your skills and such. So it's a matter of marketing that. And if you have no appetite for that, I mean, I guess you can be kind of a gig-based pseudo employee on Upwork or something, but man, that's speaking of a grind. I wouldn't go that route. So I guess to circle all the way back, unpack what it is that you hate about LinkedIn, and can you mitigate that? If not, can you go somewhere else and feel better about those channels for whatever reason? And if that's not the case either, can you somehow delegate the marketing? And if it's not any of those, then you might want to have kind of a mental level setting evaluation of what you're doing, because if it's not any of those, it sounds like you don't really want to market or sell your business, which, totally understandable, but that starts to get into more, you're looking more like an employee, and you might be happier mostly just focusing on your craft and not worrying about running the business and the customer acquisition apparatus. So yeah, that is my take on what to do if you hate creating content in LinkedIn, or I guess you could substitute any channel for LinkedIn if you're targeting it and you don't like the thought of it. I think all that wisdom would slightly generalized still apply. Wisdom such as it is. Hopefully someone out there finds this helpful, and I will catch you all next time.